Hi, I'm Marina from Frocks Frolics and I'm going to show you how to make this lovely little dress today. In this video, I'm going to show you how to make the quick Isabella dress, which matches the girl's dress, which comes in ages 1 to 12. Here I'm using an American doll, which is an 18-inch doll to fit this. And you can always look in my instructions where you find the exact measurements for this doll, so that if you have a different doll at your disposal, that you can check whether it's going to fit or make adjustments as you need. This quick version has not got any pin tags that you can see here. I thought, nah, I'm just gonna put some lace on, which is much quicker. I also added the flat-waisted skirt because that's quicker than doing it gathered. However, you can do either skirt or either top. You can make it either lined or unlined. That's this version here. I kept it very simple for all you beginners out there that want to learn how to make a dress. This is a dress that works with a facing, and the first thing we're going to do is now have a quick look at all the pieces that we have cut out to make this dress. We are going to look at the bodice patterns first, and then afterwards we'll look at the skirt, right? So put the skirt to the side for now. And the front yoke here is cut on the fold. That means that when we open it out, we get one piece and not a seam down the front, which you wouldn't want. And then we've shortened it here to give me the flat yoke that sits flush on the waist. And on the back, we've also cut it back. And if you didn't do that, you had the wider one, then you would get that gathered version. But here we have the flat version, so I cut that back as well. And it's cut mirror image. The other thing is that I am folding away where you have the blue dashed line along here. That means for the flat waist, I'm going to create that pattern piece. And then we have got the sleeve pattern on the left there. Both are the same, left and right. And underneath it, we have got the back, which again is cut mirror image and slightly reduced along the blue dashed line. The front piece is actually my lining piece, and we're going to work that with a facing, and you can see also the mark on the side to where the sleeve starts and ends, and you want to make sure that on the back and the front you have marked that. This is my front facing, and again I cut it on the fold, and then the back facing is cut mirror image. You also need 12 centimeters of Velcro, and I've just cut mine through the center, so it's a slimmer piece. So I've got those two, and then I've got another stretch left for another dress maybe, right? We want to serge the sides of the yoke, leave the center back open. You want to serge the hem of the sleeve and also the sides of the bodices, front and back. Now we're going to have a quick look at the pieces we need for the skirt. Let's just remind ourselves that there are two different skirts, one with a flat waist and one with a gathered waist. And you can do both of these. You don't need to do one dress exactly like I have done or the other dress exactly like I have done. You can take the unlined version and you can add the gathered skirt to it. That makes no difference, simply because it's only in the bodice where you have the difference of either lined or working with a facing. So you can swap these skirts out as you like. You can also swap out the methods for the hems. That's completely okay. So this is the single length of skirt, which is cut on the fold across the fabric, the full width. So that could be a slimmer width or wider width, 120 or 140. That's, you know, if it's 140, it's going to be like slightly more gathered down in this area. You could also do the big skirt, of course. In that case, you would cut across the fabric twice and then open out the center back. But for this particular version, we don't need that. So let's put that away, and that's my skirt ready. Now we also want to prep up the front. So grab yourself some lace and put that on. You don't have to put lace on at all, but I think it's rather nice. And I'm just stitching that down the center of the lace. Maybe I should have pinned it a bit better. It did move a little bit, but to be honest, nobody really looks at it, do they? Do the same on the other side. Wibbly wobbly. Look at that. And then when you have a strip of lace like I have in the center, it's quite simple to just, you know, stitch down one side and then the other side. And back up the other side, and that's my front piece prepared, looking spiffy. And you can see you can actually not see any of the stitching. It really gets lost in the lace, so no need to do any of this by hand. Now we're going to close the shoulder seams, and you have two options here. You could either serge the edges first, then close the shoulder seams and then iron them apart, or you can do what I have done here, and that is I have sewn it together with a seam allowance of 1 centimeter and then serged the edge and then ironed it towards the center back. That is up to you, and it also depends on the thickness of your fabric. If it's very lightweight, and because it's a doll dress and we want to do it quickly, you can just sew them together and that's fine. If you have thicker fabric, then serge the edges first, then sew them together, iron them apart, and that also works. Place the back pieces next to the front piece as they would be when you have it sewn together, and then fold over the back pieces so that the shoulder seams lie on top of each other with the right sides facing, and then you put a pin in there. Just one pin will do, just as long as you don't confuse them and get the wrong one on there, and then that's it. We can pop over to the sewing machine, sew the seam together and then serge it. Iron the seam to the center back. This is one of the main rules for all your sewing, that seams always face the center back. Here we can have another look at it. Look, it's sewn up. There we go. We've got the serging and the seam faces the center back. Next, we're going to work the sleeves and put them in. Now, if you decide that you don't want to put in sleeves, that's completely okay. What you do is simply serge all the way around the armhole for that, and then we just turn it in and top stitch it down. That's exactly the same way as we do it with the sleeve, just only in the lower area. And what you would do is you would do it all the way around. So you can leave the sleeves off. But if you are going to put the sleeves in, then this is how it's done. Grab yourself the sleeves and turn them up a centimeter or slightly less. Again, it doesn't really matter here how you do it. And then we're going to top stitch it, and we top stitch right to the center of our serging. Line it up with the mark on the presser foot, whichever that might be. Now we can put the sleeves in, and the sleeves have no front or no back, so no worries. And if you wanted to omit the sleeves like we talked about, then you would just serge this edge here and turn it in, but we are going to put them in. So you want to put gather threads around the edge, the first one fairly close to the edge, and then you do another 1 foot width next to it. And when we pull gather threads, we always want to pull the bobbin threads because they're slightly looser than the upper threads. And that's why when we're using gathering stitches, we always have the right side of the fabric facing up as you do it. Now we can put those little ones in, and we have marked on our front piece and the back pieces, of course, where the sleeve needs to end and start. And now I can just pull on the bobbin threads, pull from the other side and gather them. And then I'm going to take the other hem edge of the sleeve and put that where I have the snip on the back piece. Put my pin in vertical to the seam, stretch it out, and then if I need to gather a little bit more, I do that. Yeah, it's a little bit loose here. Pin in here, need to pull it a little bit more and then maybe wrap it around the pin if necessary so that my gather stitches can't go anywhere. and then you distribute them evenly across the shoulder seam, sort of 1 to 1.5 centimeters either side. Great. And now I sew them in, and it doesn't have to be a centimeter, it can be just foot width, because when we turn in the serging in a minute, that's really under a centimeter, so foot width is quite enough here. Oh, look, some of my gathers have pulled down. Lock in your stitches, serge the edge. And then the next step will be to remove your gather threads for starters, and then we're going to turn that serged edge under. You're going to top stitch from here. You go up to where you can see the seam of the sleeve. You turn with a needle in the fabric and you secure it on there, and that gives you a really neat finish. And also what it means is that you can then iron your seam allowance into the sleeve, which looks much nicer, and you don't have to have the seam allowance facing into the shoulder, right? That's the one thing I like about it. I think it looks really nice. I don't think it would look all that good if you had to like top stitch all the way around. It makes the sleeve a little bit flatter as well. So you want to do that on both sides to get this really lovely finish. I'm sewing fairly close to the edge. I would say about half a presser foot. It's not really very much, just so you catch it and there is no tension. I sew right to that point where I can see the seam line of the hem of the sleeve, and then I just turn my needle and I go in there and I secure my stitches, and it looks really neat and clean like you just saw in my example. And then on the other side, I start on the sleeve, sew into the bodice a bit, then needle down, and make sure it's not like by accident turned in too much or too little. Hold it quite taut and stitch along here as well. There we go. Lovely. And that makes it so brilliant, because you can see here how my seam stays into the sleeve, and that of course looks nicer than when it goes the other way, which makes it a little bit flatter. Depends what you like better, but I personally prefer it if it stays into the sleeve, and with this method you can do it. Now we're going to do the facing for the neckline, and that is super simple, and you can see what that looks like when it's finished here. So it's very nice and simple and neat, and most of all it's really quick. So what you want to do is simply close the shoulders of your facing, and then you don't need to serge those because they're face down and you won't see those, so you can just leave them as they are. But we are serging all the way around our facing, and then we can put it onto the neckline. Place the facings as you would like them to look when they're finished, and then again we fold over the back pieces onto the front so that the right sides face each other, and then we close the seams with a seam allowance of 1 centimeter on either side. They do not need overlocking, and then I kind of finger iron the seam apart. You should really do it on the on the iron, but I was just right next to this machine, so I thought, no, I finger iron it, and then I serge all the way around the outer edge of my facing. All the way around. There's a lot of lifting up the presser foot and moving it round with doll's clothes, I found, because the rounds or the curves are so much more pronounced than in a little girl's dress, for example. And now I am giving it a little press. Okay, take that facing, and with the right sides facing each other, you just place the facing onto the neckline, pin it in just a few strategic places. It doesn't need to over pinning really. And then we're going to sew it in, and here you can use the seam allowance of foot width, or you could do it a centimeter, it doesn't really matter because nobody's going to see a difference. And then we work our way around. And when you get to the turning points, you want the needle in the fabric and then turn it. Always push your fabric in straight as you move in, you know. So move the fabric around so it goes in straight. And I don't look at my needle necessarily. I mean, it's not quite true. I sort of flicker between the needle and the edge of the presser foot. But on a haul, if I'm doing foot width, I'm lining up the edge of my presser foot, or the top actually of the edge of my presser foot, with the edge of the fabric rather than looking at the needle. Because when you look at the needle, it's more likely to go wrong. It's a habit to get out of, looking at your needle. There we go. All the way to the end. You can actually cut everything back quite rigorously or in steps if you like. I don't think it matters very much. It matters only at the top part. If you put, for example here, if you were to put cam snaps on, which we're not going to do for this. So if you left the seam allowances standing, that would be good as well. Just make sure that you really snip in the corners so that it's easy to turn. I have done a little bit of understitching here as well, as you can see on a finished one, which is really nice because when you're turning that neckline, it makes it so much easier. So you don't need to necessarily pin anything. You can just go with this. You can understitch the neckline and then you just turn it in and top stitch it again. You can also leave the top stitching off. I thought it would look rather nice. I don't think it really needed it now that I've done it. But yeah, that's how you want it. Decide whether that makes sense. I think it would look really nice if it was a plain fabric. Here it kind of is a little bit lost. Here you can see how I've snipped it and then I'm cutting it back, more for you to see how to cut back stuff rather than it actually being necessary on this particular dress because I'm using very lightweight fabric. But if you have a thicker fabric, cutting things back in layers is very, very good. Also, if you're putting closures like cam snaps into the center back, cut it back really sharpish because the top cam snap will always sit right in that top corner. And if you have got a seam interfering with it, they, number one, either won't go in or they will come off. They will just pop off real easy, which is not what we want. But in this case, none of this cutting back was really all that important. I could have just left it all standing and just snipped in the corners, right? There we go. Now I'm going to understitch. That means I'm stitching my seam onto my facing, which gives me a really beautiful edge. That's how you should work most of your necklines because it makes it easier. And the nice thing is you don't have to get up from the sewing machine again. You could, in theory, just fold it under and top stitch it again, which is what they do in industry, rather than what we're doing, which is understitching and then maybe even pressing it before you top stitch it, right? So there is a reason for the understitching. Number one, lining can't roll out. Number two, it makes it a much more fluid work situation for you. Right, so really pull that apart and stitch very close to the edge. And voila, we've got a beautiful edge. Now I've put a few pins in instead of ironing it, although I had to get up to my show table, I call it. So I might as well have just ironed it. But if you are sitting at your sewing machine, just pin it and then top stitch it again. Now, like I said in my explanation, my top stitching got a little bit lost in all the pattern of this particular fabric. But if it had been an uni one, like say a nice yellow or red or whatever, I could have used a contrast to set an accent. I could also have used an embroidery stitch, like a little flower to go all the way around, and then lined it up foot width, and that would also look absolutely stunning. And instead of the lace, you can do the same thing. If you have got a slightly thicker fabric that can take embroidery without, you know, crunching up together, or you put some embroidery paper underneath it that rips away afterwards, you can do that as well. Then you could have really beautiful embroidery going down the front, all sorts of different things. And then afterwards you put pearls on that. I mean, how cool would that be? That would be really, really pretty as well. Now we're going to close our side seams, and again we want to use a centimeter seam allowance and make sure that the edges sit directly on each other and on the underarm, because we don't want one to be slightly higher than the other. That can't shimmy or shift. And we sew that together with a 1 centimeter seam allowance, and then we can iron those apart. And that's the bodice done, really. There we are, look. Now we're going to work the skirt and the hem, and for this dress I have done a recessed hem, which I think is really gorgeous, and a lot of people still get it wrong. I don't know why. People tell me what I'm not making clear enough, whereby you sew your lace to the edge of the fabric and then you simply push it up and you get this lovely recess here and this lovely finish, which looks like she is wearing a petticoat. Incidentally, I actually made a petticoat for this as well, which you can of course also make with this dress, and that really poofs it out a little bit more. So I think that's really cool as well. So if you want to make that, you can do a little skirt with that too, but I think it's really lovely. So I'm going to show you how to do the recessed hem now, and then we're also going to work the yoke, and the yoke of course is super easy because it fits to the top exactly. So the first thing is to do the hem, gather the top edge of that skirt, sew it to the yoke, serge the seam, and then we're going to sew it to the top. So quick. We'll put the backs of the yoke on the front yoke, and we're closing the sides of it. 1 centimeter seam allowance. And then we're going to iron those seams apart. Now to attach the skirt to the yoke, we need to gather the top edge so it fits to the yoke, obviously. And at this point, it is quite prudent to do your hem because it's still just one straight piece. If you want to do a regular hem, you serge the edge here and then you turn it up and top stitch the hem, or you can sew on some lace here, which is what I'm going to do. So I'm taking my lace, and with the right sides facing each other, I'm just going to pop that onto the edge. I'm going to cut off those waves, by the way, that you can see on the lace, and I'm just going to serge it. There's no need to sew this together first. It makes no odds whatsoever. So just place that on so that you're cutting off the waves. In my case, maybe there is nothing you want to cut off. Maybe I could have reduced the lace a little bit, but I think it looks quite nice how it is. And now you flip under the lace like that, flip it over, and you roll down the skirt fabric until it gets to a point that you think it's a nice recessed hem. It looks absolutely spectacular and it isn't hard, and I hope no one gets it wrong after this. No one. So when I've decided where I want it to be, maybe a little bit more here, I do that all the way over. So I go onto my ironing board now and I push my fabric up to the point that I think looks good on my lace. And then I press in a nice sharp edge here that cannot move. You can see the recess here we've got, very pretty. Turn it over and we're stitching from the underside directly on the side of the serging or in the center of the serging. It doesn't matter, you just go straight on there. All the way to the end. And that gives you a fantastic result. I would use stitch length 3 for that. And we're also going to put in the gather threads, and we're going to do that, well, sort of 2-3 millimeters next to the rough edge here, and then we're going to do another 1 foot width next to it, and it has to be the longest stitch length available on your sewing machine. And we mark the center front, and we have marked the center front of the yoke just by folding it over. If you haven't done that yet, do it now, and then open out your little skirt looking spiffing, and we're going to put the center front of the skirt onto the center front of the yoke. Put a pin in there. Start pulling the bobbin threads until it fits onto the yoke. It's not drastically gathered. If you had a slightly wider fabric, it would be a little more. But those quilting fabrics usually have a 120 width, and I think that's quite nice. That works really well. Now you take the edges here and you just put a pin vertical to the seam. Make sure it's the right length, and then you wrap the bobbin threads around that needle, and then we can distribute the gathers roughly and put them in. And then afterwards we're going to sort them out a little bit more on the sewing machine. And we're going to stitch right in the center of those gather threads. I'll do the same on the other side. There we go. Pin that side in as well. It's actually really simple when the back's left open till the end. Fabulous. Right, next step is to go over to the sewing machine and to stitch this skirt on. Don't forget to reduce your stitch length again to 2.5. I often do that, but I forget, and then I start stitching it all in with this really long stitch length, and then I have to do it again. Oh no! So you want to make sure that you do that. You can distribute your gathers a little bit better with the pins that you remove as you go along, and also make sure that the yoke doesn't slip out from under or pushes up or has a pleat or, you know, such a like. Take your time and stitch right through the center of those 2 gather threads, and then make sure all the pins are removed before you start serging. And again, be very careful that the yoke doesn't push up in here. That will be really, really sad if you caught it and God forbid you cut into it, because that's heartbreaking, and we've all done that sort of thing, so I'm just warning you. Now we're going to top stitch the seam onto the yoke, so you're forcing the fabric apart. Make sure the seam sits towards the yoke, but it'll automatically do that, so no worries. And you can see here that I've removed the gather thread from the lower edge and the top edge. I just left the gather threads in. Last not least, we're going to put the skirt onto the bodice very simply in this case, because it'll fit on from one end to the other perfectly. So pin it to the end, pin it in the middle, and then distribute the rest of it and it'll fit perfectly. And that's it basically. Then we serge the seam and we stitch our seam into the bodice so it looks like this afterwards, and that's it, done. Put the center front of the bodice on the center front of the skirt and put a pin in there. Move over to the edge and secure those right on top of each other. And then when you stretch that out, it'll fit on top of each other, and all you have to do is put a few more pins in. If you were making the gathered yoke skirt, which has got that really big skirt, of course you would have to gather the top edge of your yoke and then make it fit onto the bodice before you sew it on. Do it on the other side as well. And that's looking really nice. Lovely. Now go over to the sewing machine and sew it in. 1 centimeter seam allowance. Make sure that your yoke doesn't push up, because again, it does want to do that, and that's not funny. It really, you know, if you have got a pleat in there or wobbly, you want to put that right before you start serging in a minute. So there we go, last little bit. Make sure none of the seams are folded over. Lovely. Check for wobblies, of course, that is your next step. And of course, I had a wobbly in here, and quite a big one. Look at that. So I put that right. I've just unpicked that. You don't want to leave that because, number one, once the gather threads are pulled out, it's a little bit difficult to do that. Then you want to put the center backs on top of each other to check that your waist seam is in the right position and that your lace ends at the right point, you know, so that when you put this all together, it's not like one side's longer than the other, and it's easily done. Now we serge our seam here, and then we're going to top stitch the seam into the waist, and then we can serge the center back. Now here, when you serge, make very sure that nothing pushes up. It's heartbreaking when you catch something underneath it and literally cut into it because it's pushed up. Now I want to show you a little trick how you can secure your gather threads. You do a few stitches and then you really pull on that long tail you get, move it around the foot, put the foot down and keep on sewing. And that will make sure that this doesn't unravel or look unsightly because there's threads hanging after a while. When you get to the neckline here, which is the top edge in this case, you do 2 stitches over the edge. You go 1, 2, right, and then lift the presser foot, turn it, and move it back on. Now push it until you can feel the needles, and then sew over it. Leave a long tail hanging, cut it off, pull on the threads, and then when you get one left hanging at the end, pull that really hard, and that will now fix it in. Final step, people, we just need to put in this lovely closure here, and we're going to put the Velcro on. It feels really weird because you're putting the Velcro on the top edge here and on the top edge on the other side, but then this edge is folded in and that makes the closure. But it also makes it really, really easy because you can do it as 2 separate pieces as they're not sewn together yet. And then when we close the seam in this area, it's perfectly finished. So that is why I think this is so much easier to work, whoops, than the Velcro on this dress where everything is together already here and then you have to fill your Velcro on. So this is really fast, and yeah, let me show you how that's done. Take your Velcro, and we want to put the Velcro on either side on the top, and then in the front bit here it will just fold under. So where we're going to sew this one on is obviously the edge that faces into the bodice, and you don't need to necessarily do the front edge. You can do both edges, but you will double stitch the front edge then. And on the other side, where you do the side with the hooks on it, you will sew all the way around it to fix it. And it's important that both sides start and end in the same place so that you don't end up with unsightly pleats afterwards. So I'm just going to pin that in, move on over to my sewing machine and get those stitched in. Start with the harder part of my Velcro, which is the hook side, and I'm placing that right on the edge, sewing down there, coming across the top and then sewing back down on the other side. There we go, needle down, turn it, and sew down the other side. And that's the underside of the Velcro is in. It's a very common method for dolls' dresses or any doll's clothes, and I think it's pretty cool. There we go. On the other side now, because it's folded over, you really only need to secure it on the side that faces into the bodice. You can do both sides. I did it here, but it really isn't necessary. Now you want to close the Velcro, make sure that everything lies how it should be. That is the top edge, your waistline, and where the yoke sits. And then you pin it just under the Velcro, and we're going to sew that together with a seam allowance of 1 centimeter, and then the seam goes into one direction. There we go, all done. I'm going to iron that now. So the seam faces into the left, so into the side that's folded over at the top. That looks lovely, doesn't it? So now that I've turned that over, super, I can do that top stitching now, which will catch the Velcro underneath it. So I'm going slightly less than presser foot, and that will catch my Velcro. That's important, obviously, because you haven't stitched it down. And also, it's a pretty little stitch. It's almost like you've put a zipper in there. That's what it looks like. Secure your stitches and then do up your Velcro. Put it back under and just stitch across. So that way it can't rip out or anything. So that's really secure now. Now the dress is actually finished, I got a bit carried away. As you can see here, I had to put on these lovely pearls, and I wanted to show you how that works. I think they are so beautiful. So let's get on and sew a few pearls on. Hope you enjoy it. And to put on pearls, you want a double thread with a knot at the end. And in my case, I put a pearl in the center here. And I've chosen this blue pearl. I thought that was really, really nice, actually. And it's so easy. You just go back in where you came out, and then I went onto the flower, the little gaps I have of this lace. And I think that's really, really pretty. And I do that all the way around. And I found that my blue little pearl had moved. The other stuff sat pretty well, so I only go through once or twice because these are just show clothes. If they are for actual kids, you need to be really careful. Obviously, if you put pearls on, that's not for little kids, so they have to be the right age for that. Just bear that in mind when you put pearls on, you know. And now I'm going through the pearl again, and I'm going to simply just pull it to the place that it should go to. There we are. Awesome. Just pull, pull, pull. Wonderful. And then I can just secure it on the underside, and I do that with all the rest of them until I'm done. Now we finished the beautiful dress. I hope you really enjoyed this and you are completely hooked on doll's clothes like I clearly am. I made 28 patterns and they're all to come. It might take me a very long time to bring all of them out, but you can look forward to having plenty more where this came from in the coming months, and I hope to see you soon again at frocksandfrolics.com, your place where you can get sewing patterns and matching video instructions. Bye for now.